Jessie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to hear your story, not just because it was a great outcome, but for the lessons learned within your journey. So can you give us a little bit of background, your professional background, and how you became the CEO at Interactive?
Sure. Prior to EcoInteractive, I spent a few years in software, and I also spent some time at startups as well as Fortune 500 companies. When Alpine offered me the chance to be a first-time CEO, I jumped at it because I wanted to build something exciting with a great team while leveraging what I knew to be world-class infrastructure supporting operators at Alpine. So that's how I landed at the chance to become CEO of EcoInteractive.
What stands out about your story is how intentionally you built the business. You weren't just building to grow, you were building towards a company that others would want to acquire. Can you share a few of the levers that you helped pull to get you from where you were to where you needed to be?
It sounds simple, but there were really three main things. One is industry-leading product and technology. I think in a software, fast-paced world that we live in today, no matter what industry you're in, whether PE-backed, VC-backed, founder-led, it's really important that you're actually delivering a product that adds value to customers. The second was a genuine, relentless focus on customer delight. And that meant you can take care of it from the product, but it's also how you show up in your service and what your team believes in their mission every day when they're interacting with customers. And then the last is probably the most important, that leads to the first two outcomes, which is building a world-class team. If we created a team that we invested in and that really believed in the mission and we invested in their growth, a lot of the rest would take care of itself. And we really executed on that.
I love that. And we believe wholeheartedly in all three of those things. You know, we're different because we're an M&A firm and services, right, to software company, but all three of those are spot on. There are over 3,500 investment banks and M&A advisors out there. So we know you had options when selecting an M&A advisor to represent you. Can you share what stood out when you first met SEG?
For our particular space, there are unique nuances about the operating dynamics, market landscape, and buyers. And then there's also where we played in that space. How do you articulate our unique value and clarify and simplify it in a way that's easy for buyers to understand? SEG just really hone in on those two things. And if you think about what matters in a process, I think having the right level of expertise in both the industry and being able to really articulate the company's value is a key component of what an advisor can bring. And that really stood out to us in that first meeting.
I think that's a great segue into, the team has told me that you had two distinct product lines. And that was a unique challenge that they had to overcome in communicating that and positioning that. Can you share how you worked with the team to set that narrative up?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The SEG team helped us craft the narrative around how do you describe the opportunity with having these two different lines, but also that they are in some ways the same fundamental platform. So when you think about messaging, how do you simplify that so it's not too complicated for buyers to understand at first glance? And then when they got comfortable with just overall what our platform can do for different kind of customers, then we can go a layer deeper to help buyers understand what are the nuances for each customer segment and the opportunities that means we have multiple channels of expansion in the future. I think we spent a lot of time with SEG's help early on in the process. And I think that's one area where it really helps to have an advisor who proactively thinks about what are the potential gotchas or the points of confusion that could trip up buyers in the process. And let's do that prep work early on. So I was really grateful that we did that work early on with SEG's help.
Preparing for M&A can be very demanding on a CEO. There are the external pressures of attracting the right buyers and marketing the deal, and the internal pressures of running the company still. At SEG, our job is to make that part smoother, strategic, and ultimately more successful for you. Can you tell me what some of the top concerns you all had heading into the process, and how did SEG help alleviate those concerns?
Yeah, I think, as you said, any process, it puts a lot of demand and pressure on the leadership team to run two jobs at once, your day job and the exit process. And when things got really intense, I think that's where you can also see a lot of value for having an advisor who can help you understand the priorities, manage expectations across different key stakeholders, and good planning means you won't be rushing in to do preparations, but you've done a lot of that up front. How that translated for us was, I think early on, SEG gave us a sense of what are the types of data requests, diligence requests that we can expect at different points of the process. So how do we get ahead of that? That triggered more downstream workflows internally at our company to start preparing with sufficient advanced lead time, and also to circulate all of that within a broader group so that we can understand how all the different data pieces tie together in an overall narrative. So the proactiveness of having an advisor tell you, here's what you need to be doing because we know how long this can take, was very helpful.
You had the unique experience of leading two processes at EcoInteractive, one with a previous advisor that didn't end in a transaction, and one with SEG that did. You've said before that the process felt completely different. Can you share some of the differences in the two processes?
Different advisors brought relatively different strengths at the initial outset. But when we got through both, it was clear how we think about what it means to have a rigorous process and creating enough competitive tension dynamics. For us, it was always clear that SUG knew how to do that. It was one of the reasons why we chose them. It was clear these are folks who've done this over and over again, and they were going to make sure we project manage this to the T.
Were there moments during the process that you were particularly glad SEG was in your corner?
I think that there were parts of the process that got more and more intense. And at that point, knowing we had access to every level of team at SEG, because it's not just always we need the strategic thought leaders. We also needed people who can get on the phones and coordinate to manage stakeholders, to help us dig deep into the data and help us do a first pass at the data room gathering. That took a huge burden off of us to be able to focus on the more important part of how do we show up when we interact with buyers and really answer their most important questions. The other part is leaning on SEG's expertise to make judgment calls in areas we don't have expertise in. And in a particular instance I could think of is when you have different types of buyers, how do you assess real intent? And how do you decide when to keep someone in a process or not? There were moments in a process where there were counterintuitive decisions that we made at SEG's behest that completely transform, I think, the final outcome in a positive way. And I think that all comes from SEG's experience in seeing many reps of how do you treat different buyers from successful outcomes before.
This piggybacks off of that. Beyond buyer conversations, there's another critical layer, and that's managing internal stakeholders. How did SEG help build confidence with the board that the deal was moving in the right direction?
SEG had a very clear project plan for how the process will play out and what are the timelines and milestones. What gave confidence to not just the board, but to the rest of us is we kept to that timeline. When you start to slip past milestones, that's when you start to worry, are we gonna get this done? But that never happened. And I think that all comes down to having rigor, having attention and diligence from their team to make sure all the parties were pursuing their work stream on time. I can really say throughout the whole process, we never missed a deadline.
One of the biggest priorities is de-risking every stage of the process to have a smooth close at the end. And in your case, it was remarkable. You went from IOI to close in record time. Let's talk about what made that possible.
This point is kind of funny, but I think I have purchased homes that have closed longer than it took our deal to close from LOI to signing. And I think that's also another testament of how successful the process was. Having a credible buyer who is everything that you want in the next chapter, but also able to step through and execute very swiftly, means that we also had advisors who could help us manage all the complexity of diligence in a short period of time. But I think apart from that, just being able to see a diversity of interested parties and what they were wanting to do in the GovTech sector, that was something that as an opportunity SCG brought to us, and we never expected as much as we were able to see. And that is now helping us inform how we think about the evolution of this space with all the different parties who could potentially think about what they want to do. But the last thing is, I think just in terms of the outcome for our team, the most important thing, finding a home where the investor believes in all of our key principles, like people first, customers and teams, and also having conviction to invest behind us and support us in where we want to go. I think that is the most important thing that we're happy about, and we're so glad when you have an advisor who's great people, great to work with, they also bring great networks. And I think that is an important part of how we ended up with a great buyer too.
What would you tell a CEO who's wondering if they should hire an M&A advisor?
I would tell everyone hire an M&A advisor if you're thinking about running a process or going through a transaction, because there are blind spots that we have as human beings, and there's always someone out there who can add more value to your team. I think a great advisor bringing their network and their expertise can add a ton of value. And if you think about the ultimate outcome in terms of returns to your investors, the cost of that will more than pay for itself if you have a great, successful outcome.
Why would you recommend SEG to another CEO?
What I would tell CEOs is that if I could sell future businesses, I would always want to look for SEG if that's in an area that they want to play in, because what you want from an advisor is someone, one, who can speak really well about your business, and two, have the buyer networks that are relevant to you so that they bring things to the table that you can't bring yourself. And then three, have all around a dedicated team who would show up proactively without you having to ask. And that's at every single level of the team. And we just felt like we were really well taken care of, that they really had our best interests at heart at all times. And at the same time, ran a firm, rigorous process that would ensure we'd have a successful outcome. So I think all of those things put together just means I would love to work with SEG again. I would definitely recommend SEG to other CEOs.